The universe has been around for, what, almost 14 billion years?
Yeah, roughly 14 billion, give or take.
Right, and there are roughly 400 billion stars just in our galaxy alone.
Just in the Milky Way, exactly.
So statistically speaking, I mean, we should be absolutely surrounded by, like, cosmic megastructures or alien radio chatter, expanding superintelligences.
We should be tripping over them, yeah.
But when we actually look up, it is completely, terrifyingly silent.
It's the ultimate cold case, honestly. The sheer emptiness it defies everything we know about probability.
And what if the exact same invisible force keeping the stars empty is the reason your grocery bill is too high right now? Or why the U.S. national debt is exploding? Or, why the Roman Empire collapsed?
It sounds crazy when you put it like that, but yeah.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are taking on this massive, just mind-bending premise. Our mission for this deep dive is to unpack a unified theory of why successful civilizations, like, inevitably stop growing and just decay.
And we're pulling this from a really sweeping essay. It's by Elias Kunis, titled The Axiological Malthusian Trap Theory of Civilizational Thermodynamics.
Right, and we're going to distill this massive theory down, give you, the listener, a completely new lens to view history and politics and, honestly, the very future of our species, without getting bogged down in all the academic jargon.
I mean, to really understand the scope of Kunis's argument, we do have to start with that cosmic silence you just mentioned.
The Fermi Paradox.
Exactly. The famous question, where is everybody? Kunis uses this not just as like a philosophical thought experiment. He uses it as the ultimate piece of empirical evidence for his theory.
Because there are basically two profound absences we observe when we look at the night sky. The first is what the essay calls the Great Silence.
Right. No radio signals, no beacons.
No messages, just static. But the second absence is almost even more damning. It's the absent swarm.
Yeah, this is the concept of grabby aliens in astrophysics.
Grabby aliens, right.
The logic basically dictates that any truly successful, exponentially expanding intelligence would inevitably build massive infrastructure.
They'd be building Dyson spheres, right?
Yeah.
Enclosing entire stars to harvest the energy.
Exactly, or they would send out von Neumann probes.
Which are the machines that travel to a star system, mine it for resources, build like 1 million copies of themselves, and just spread across the galaxy.
Right, and if even one civilization did this, just one, they would essentially turn the universe into giant computers or habitats.
Yeah.
We would see massive, undeniable alterations to galaxies.
We'd see construction projects on a cosmic scale.
We see absolutely nothing. The universe looks completely untouched.
And people always throw out the usual answers for this, right? Like, oh, maybe there was a localized nuclear war, or a sudden climate catastrophe, or, a stray asteroid wiped out their version of the dinosaurs.
Sure, but Kunis argues those don't add up. Not when you look at the sheer scale of the silence. A random asteroid strike it's a contingent disaster.
It's a one-off.
Right. It might explain why one specific planet failed. But it absolutely struggles to explain the totality of the silence across billions of planets, over billions of years.
To filter out every single civilization, you need something systemic.
Exactly. Kunis argues the universe is empty because of a thermodynamic trap. One that's basically written into the fundamental source code of any intelligent, successful system.
It's an invisible wall that every species hits.
Yeah, every single one.
And to understand why the entire galaxy is completely silent, we have to look at the physics of success right here on Earth. We have to unpack the title of the essay itself.
The Axiological Malthusian Trap.
Right. So let's break that down, starting with the Malthus part. I think most people vaguely remember Thomas Malthus from, like, a high school history class.
He's the guy who said we were all going to starve.
Exactly.
So in 1798, Malthus published his essay on population. He observed this brutal mathematical asymmetry. He noted that human population grows exponentially.
So 2 people have 4 kids who have 8 kids who have 16.
Exactly. It curves upward. But our ability to produce food only grows arithmetically in a straight, steady line.
You clear a new field, you get a bit more wheat.
Right. And eventually that curving exponential line of hungry mouths overtakes the straight arithmetic line of food supply,
triggering famine and collapse.
But Kunis isn't just talking about running out of wheat here. He takes that core mathematical mismatch and applies it to the very fabric of society.
He applies it to complexity and obligations, right?
Yeah. This is the core generalization of the Malthusian trap. In any successful society, complexity grows continuously and exponentially.
And by complexity, we mean...
It's not just population. It's bureaucratic overhead, social entitlements, legal regulations, institutional promises, the whole infrastructure required to maintain it all. It compounds.
Okay, so that line curves up constantly.
But our capacity to manage that complexity, the resources we generate through, say, technological breakthroughs or organizational innovations, that only grows in discrete, rare, arithmetic jumps.
So we invent the steam engine, or the internet, and that gives us a massive sudden boost in capacity.
A massive surplus of wealth and energy, yeah.
Yeah.
But then you hit a long plateau, the technology gets adopted, the efficiency gains are priced in, and the growth flattens out.
Meanwhile, the line for complexity, like the pensions we've promised, the laws we've written, the administrative state that just keeps curving upward.
Exactly. Topologically speaking, a continuous exponential line will always permanently overtake a discrete stepwise line.
It's just inevitable math.
There's a specific mathematical crossover point where the demands of the system exceed the capacity of the system to maintain itself.
Okay, so that's the Malthusian part, but the title of the essay is The Axiological Malthusian Trap. Axiology, that's the study of values, right? What we value, what we deem good or desirable.
Right.
Why does Kunis put that word front and center?
Because the trap isn't fundamentally about running out of physical resources. It's about a collapse of values. It is a shift in the fundamental desires of a civilization.
Okay, I see.
To explain this, the essay introduces these two incredible concepts from what it calls civilizational thermodynamics, the Foundry state and the Hospice state.
I really love these terms. Let's talk about the Foundry first. This is basically a civilization in its growth phase, right?
Yeah, a Foundry is high energy. It's hyper-focused on metamorphosis, exploration, building new complexity.
It's building the rockets and the mega project.
Exactly. It values empirical truth-seeking and risk-taking. But from a physics perspective, a Foundry is a highly unstable, far from equilibrium state.
It takes immense effort to maintain.
Continuous conscious effort, yeah.
It's like balancing a heavy boulder on the very peak of a mountain. The slightest breeze, the slightest lapse in attention, and gravity just wants to pull it down into the valley.
And that valley at the bottom, the low-energy, highly stable resting state that the holder naturally wants to roll into, that is the Hospice state.
The Hospice.
A Hospice civilization is comfort-oriented. Its ultimate axiological goal is safety, stability, and the preservation of past gains.
It avoids risk at all costs.
At all costs. It is the thermodynamic path of least resistance.
I look at this through the lens of, like, pure couch potato physics.
Couch potato physics, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a massive amount of metabolic energy to force yourself to go to the gym, lift heavy weights, tear your muscles to build new strength. You are actively fighting your body's desire to rest.
Right, that's the Foundry state.
Exactly. But it takes absolutely zero energy to just collapse onto the couch, wrap yourself in a blanket, and mindlessly scroll on your phone. That's the Hospice state.
It takes zero effort.
So Kunis is arguing that civilizational gravity naturally, relentlessly pulls every society toward the couch.
It's a very accurate way to visualize the thermodynamics of it.
Yeah.
But we have to look at the mechanism driving that pull. It's actually driven by the very thing we all strive for.
Which is what?
Abundance.
Wait, success itself is the trigger.
It is the ultimate paradox. Think about it. When a society is poor, when it exists in a state of harsh scarcity, risk is absolutely necessary for survival.
Because if you don't take a risk, if you don't hunt the mammoth or sail across the ocean or plant the new crop, you literally starve.
Exactly. The downside of not acting is certain death. The upside of taking a risk is survival. So a growth-oriented, high-energy Foundry state is perfectly rational in that environment.
But when you win, when you conquer the environment and get rich,
the rational calculus flips entirely. When you achieve abundance, you're already wealthy, you're comfortable and safe.
Right.
Taking a massive risk suddenly offers a very tiny upside. Maybe you get, 5% more comfortable? But it carries a massive catastrophic downside. You could lose the incredible comfort you already possess.
Wow, yeah. Why launch a highly dangerous, multi-generational, incredibly expensive mission to colonize Mars when you have perfect climate control, abundant food, and high-speed internet right here on Earth?
Exactly. So success breeds a fundamental allergy to the exact kind of effort that generated the success in the first place. The boulder rolls into the valley, and we get incredibly comfortable there.
And this brings us to a crucial psychological layer that Kunis highlights, doesn't it?
Yes. He draws on Daniel Kahneman's prospect theory. Specifically the concept of loss aversion.
Because our brains evolved in those harsh, resource-constrained environments of the Foundry.
Right. And because of that, We are wired to feel the pain of a loss roughly twice as intensely as we feel the pleasure of an equivalent gain.
Losing $100 hurts way more than finding $100 feels good.
Because in the ancestral environment, losing your food meant death. But in a state of modern abundance, this evolved evolutionary trait becomes genuinely pathological.
We just become completely terrified of losing our current comfort.
Our status, our safety, our standard of living, we refuse to take the necessary risks to continue growing or adapting to new challenges. We become completely defensive.
So we're sitting on the couch, we refuse to go to the gym because we might pull a muscle, and we're terrified of someone taking our spot on the cushions.
That's the hospice.
But reading the essay, it goes so much deeper than just like collective laziness. It actually becomes a crisis of truth. Kunis argues that to stay on the couch, we actually have to start lying to ourselves.
This is perhaps the most profound and unsettling mechanism in the entire trap. To protect this comfortable, low-energy hospice state, a civilization must inevitably reject uncomfortable truths.
It transitions from a culture that values empirical reality into a culture that prioritizes safety narratives.
Exactly. Because rigorous truth-seeking generates insights that are fundamentally incompatible with comprehensive emotional and societal safety.
Because the truth doesn't care about your comfort. I mean, if you are deeply investigating reality, you are eventually going to find something that upsets the status quo.
A truth-seeking process, a Foundry process, might reveal that economic growth requires accepting irreducible uncertainty, or might reveal that competence hierarchies, which leave some people at the bottom, are necessary for progress.
Or that a cherished institution is completely ineffective.
Right. But a safety-seeking culture operates on narratives like all risk can be eliminated, or discomfort is a form of harm, or everyone's perspective is equally valid.
And when empirical truth contradicts those safety narratives,
A hospice civilization will inevitably suppress the truth. They have to protect the emotional and psychological comfort of its citizens.
and the essay points to some very recognizable modern examples of this dynamic. It specifically analyzes the rise of safety culture in modern institutions, particularly universities.
It does.
And just to frame this for you listening, we are looking at this purely through the mechanistic lens provided by Kunis's essay. We aren't endorsing a political stance on these modern cultural issues. We're just exploring how the text uses them as observable data points of this thermodynamic shift.
Exactly. It's a mechanical analysis.
So the essay points to things like trigger warnings, bias response teams, safe spaces, and mandatory diversity statements.
Analyzed strictly as mechanical processes, the essay argues that these measures are thermodynamically cheap ways to enforce ideological conformity.
Cheap in terms of energy.
Yes, it is energetically very inexpensive to demand consensus, prioritize emotional safety, and punish deviation from the narrative. You just mandate it.
Conversely, it is energetically highly expensive to engage in rigorous debate.
Highly expensive. To update your foundational beliefs based on contradictory data and tolerate the intense social friction of opposing viewpoints.
It takes a ton of metabolic energy to argue and risk being wrong.
So a system that is mathematically optimizing for comfort and safety will naturally institutionalize the cheap option and suppress the expensive one.
The stated conscious goal might be inclusivity or emotional well-being, but the thermodynamic result is the suppression of the very truth-seeking engine that built the civilization's abundance in the first place.
You sacrifice the capacity to adapt to reality in exchange for the comfort of the narrative.
Wow. Okay, so this gives us the complete picture of the axiological trap. The exponential complexity outgrows our arithmetic capacity. We achieve abundance, which triggers our loss aversion. We retreat to the low-energy hospice state. And to protect our comfort, we build cultural software that prioritizes safe lies over difficult truth.
That's the engine of the trap, yes.
But how does this abstract physics lesson actually play out on the ground? Like, how does a society actually circle the drain? The essay outlines 5 specific paths, right? 5 different ways a civilization can break down.
Yes. Kunis divides these into software failures and hardware failures.
Software being like our institutions, ideologies, and political structure.
Exactly. And hardware failures are the degradation of our physical bodies and environmental resources. But what is vital to grasp is that no matter which path the civilization wanders down, they all terminate at the exact same destination.
The collapse of complexity.
Collapse of complexity.
Okay, let's start with the software bugs. The first one he outlines is the democratic ratchet. This is the doom loop of universal suffrage combined with material abundance.
It operates on brutal game theory. In a democratic system, expanding social entitlements, subsidies, and state-provided benefits it's a universally popular move.
Sure. The specific beneficiaries obviously vote for the expansion because they gain directly.
And the costs of those benefits are diffused across the entire massive tax base, or, more likely, pushed into the future via debt.
So the immediate pain to the average voter is practically invisible.
Invisible. It's the ultimate path of least resistance for any politician. You stand on a stage and say, vote for me and I will give you more safety, more healthcare, more comfort. You win the election.
But the mechanism is a ratchet. It only turns in one direction.
Right. While expanding entitlements is thermodynamically and politically easy, cutting those entitlements is absolute electoral suicide.
Because once a population becomes accustomed to a certain baseline level of state-provided comfort, they view it as a fundamental right.
Exactly. Any attempt to remove it, even to save the system from bankruptcy, will cause the voters to immediately remove you from power.
Therefore, the obligations of the state compound continuously. They're growing on that exponential curve, while the economic and technological capacity to fund those obligations remains trapped on the arithmetic curve.
The math inevitably breaks.
But wait, if the democratic ratchet fails because voters will inherently refuse to cut their own benefits to save the math, wouldn't a society logically try to just, I don't know, bypass the voters?
Like rip the Band-Aid off.
Yeah. What if a strongman or essential committee just forcefully reorganized everything to force the society back into the Foundry state and keep the engine running?
That is exactly the second software failure Kunis outlines, the Communist Revolution.
Ah, okay.
It is an attempt to artificially force a high-energy utopian Foundry state.
Oh.
But it fails because it uses a fundamentally broken map of reality.
By abolishing private property and free markets.
Yes. By doing that, central planners destroy price signals.
And price signals aren't just like numbers on a tag at the grocery store. They are information.
They are the distributed information processing system of a society. Millions of people making micro decisions based on scarcity and desire.
So the computational demands of centrally planning every single aspect of a complex economy, it just vastly exceeds human or institutional capacity.
It's impossible.
It's like trying to run the entire modern internet through a single 1990s dial-up modem.
That is a perfect analogy.
A free market has millions of individual processors constantly updating prices based on immediate local feedback. A central planner is a single isolated processor trying to do all that math simultaneously for millions of products. It just freezes and crashes.
The system lacks the bandwidth to process reality. So after a brief, violent burst of forced industrialization, the system cannot manage the complexity it creates.
So what happens?
To prevent total chaotic collapse, the state must exert massive authoritarian control, freezing the society into a rigid, paranoid, stagnant hospice state. The essay notes that the Soviet Union lasted merely 74 years before this unbridgeable gap between their ideological narrative and thermodynamic reality caused the entire structure to just spontaneously disintegrate.
Wow. So democracy spends itself into oblivion and communism computationally crashes. What if a society turns to religion? Like, what if they use God to maintain order instead of a central committee or a ballot box?
That leads to the third software failure. Theocratic stasis.
Theocratic stasis.
Kunis points to the decline of the Islamic Golden Age as a prime example. Specifically, after influential thinkers like Al-Ghazali elevated religious doctrine and revelation above empirical scientific inquiry.
How does the math work there exactly?
In this path, the complexity of religious law, doctrinal interpretation, and social regulation grows exponentially. It rapidly outpaces the population's general literacy and the institutional capacity to adapt to new knowledge.
So to protect the sacred, comforting narratives from the friction and disruption of scientific discovery.
Empirical inquiry is actively suppressed or abandoned. The civilization achieves an incredibly stable homeostasis. I mean, it can last a long time, but it is completely frozen.
It enters the hospice state by explicitly choosing religious safety over the danger of truth-seeking exploration.
Exactly.
Okay, so those are the three software bugs. The political and ideological traps that lock us on the couch. But the essay then takes a hard turn into what it calls hardware failures.
Yes, path 4 and 5.
And I have to admit, when I was reading through the source material for this deep dive, this section was by far the most controversial, uncomfortable, and fascinating part of the theory. What if the problem isn't just the institutions we build? What if the actual physical hardware, the human beings themselves, are degrading?
This is path 4, biological exhaustion. And again, treating the text carefully at a mechanistic model, Kunis details two very specific sub-mechanisms that degrade the actual biological hardware of a population over successive generations of abundance.
The first of these is metabolic load, right?
Metabolic load.
So we aren't just culturally acting like couch potatoes. Our bodies are physically breaking down from the abundance.
The argument is that modern material abundance radically alters our environment in ways our biology is just not adapted for. The hyperavailability of calorically dense, nutrient-poor diets combined with incredibly sedentary lifestyles.
It leads to widespread population-level obesity, chronic low-grade inflammation, and severely degraded gut microbiomes.
Right. And normally we frame that purely as a public health crisis or a personal medical issue.
But Kunis is framing it as a civilizational energy crisis.
Because it is not just cosmetic. The essay cites measurable empirical data demonstrating that insulin resistance and systemic inflammation directly, measurably impair neurological function and neuroplasticity.
You literally experience brain fog.
Exactly. At a macro population scale, this widespread metabolic dysfunction significantly lowers the aggregate cognitive capacity and sheer physical energy required to maintain highly complex, demanding institutions.
The civilization slowly loses the literal metabolic fuel needed to stay in the foundry.
They just don't have the energy anymore.
So the brain fog from our modern diet is causing the civilizational infrastructure to slowly decay because we collectively lack the metabolic stamina to fix the potholes, audit the bureaucracies, and innovate.
That is the first half of the hardware failure.
But the second half of Path 4 is even more provocative. It is the mechanism of dysgenic selection.
Yes, and we need to unpack exactly what Kunis is claiming here, focusing purely on the thermodynamic incentives.
Right.
The mechanism operates on a fundamental inversion of biological incentives brought about by wealth.
Okay, let's look at the historical baseline. In an environment of historical scarcity, how did this work?
Well, in scarcity, capability heavily correlated with reproductive success. Traits like general intelligence, conscientiousness, delayed gratification, and physical robustness were absolutely necessary to secure enough resources to ensure your offspring survived to adulthood.
Because life was incredibly hard.
Yes. Furthermore, in an agrarian or early industrial society, children were economic assets. They worked the farm, they generated income, and they provided the only available support system for old age.
You needed kids to survive.
But in an environment of extreme modern abundance.
The incentives completely invert.
In a wealthy, technologically advanced society, children transition from being vital economic assets to being incredibly expensive, demanding luxuries.
They require massive long-term investments of time, emotional energy, and money. And they restrict your freedom.
Exactly. Therefore, highly capable, highly educated individuals face massive opportunity costs if they choose to have large families.
Right. If you are a brilliant engineer or a highly conscientious manager, having 3 or 4 children means you have to sacrifice significant career advancement, personal freedom, and material comfort.
The empirical result of this, which Kunis cites, is a persistent negative correlation between cognitive ability or educational attainment and fertility rates.
What's the number on that?
The correlation is roughly -0.2 to -0.3. Highly educated segments of the population in developed nations have significantly fewer children than the replacement rate.
Wait, hold on. Let me push back on this, because there is a standard academic explanation for this that doesn't involve hardware failure, the demographic transition theory.
Right.
It basically says that rich, industrialized countries just naturally have fewer kids because child mortality plummets, so you don't need to have 6 kids to ensure 2 survive. And women gain access to education and the workforce, giving them opportunities outside the home. It's viewed as a massive success story of development. Is Kunis saying that harmless, even positive trend is actually a fatal flaw?
Kunis argues that demographic transition theory accurately describes the visible symptoms, but it completely misses the underlying thermodynamic disease.
Okay, how so?
Yes, wealth and female empowerment lower fertility. But the mechanism is that wealth creates a profound axiological shift, a shift in ultimate values toward the hospice state. The entire culture begins to ruthlessly optimize for individual comfort, career self-actualization, and the minimization of personal risk and burden.
And in that specific value system, a child is rationally viewed as an obstacle.
Precisely. They are an obstacle to individual flourishing and comfort. The tragic mechanistic irony that the essay points out is that this value shift systematically selects against the reproduction of the very capabilities, conscientiousness, and brain power that the civilization desperately relies on to maintain its own incredibly complex, fragile institutions.
The hardware quietly degrades while the demands of the software continue to grow exponentially.
It's a thermodynamic death spiral.
Wow. That is heavy. So we have political doom loops, computational crashes, religious freezing, and the biological decay of our own minds and demographics. What is the final path?
Path 5.
Yeah.
Path 5 is environmental overshoot. This is the classic original Malthusian scenario applied to the physical planet. The population and its consumption simply consume the physical resource base vastly faster than the environment can regenerate it.
Easter Island is the classic example here, right?
Exactly. A highly complex society that engaged in massive mega-projects, carving the Moai statues, but in doing so, they cut down every single tree on the island,
They destroyed the physical hardware of their environment.
completely eliminating their ability to build boats to fish or escape, leading to total societal collapse and starvation.
The mathematical result is identical to the other paths. Exponential consumption, overwhelming finite arithmetic capacity.
Every single time.
Okay, so we have these 5 theoretical paths down the drain. Software bugs, hardware failures, environmental exhaustion. But these aren't just theoretical models drawn on a whiteboard in an economics class.
No, Kunis brings receipts.
Right. He maps this exact mathematical crossover point onto historical empires. To really understand how this plays out in reality, we need to introduce this idea from the essay of the predator-prey dynamic.
This is a brilliant synthesis in the text. It introduces a model developed by an AI safety researcher named Rocco Mijic.
Okay.
Mijic applied the Lotka-Volterra equations directly to civilizational dynamics.
Lotka-Volterra. I know that from ecology. That's the classic foxes and rabbits equation, right? It models how populations rise and fall based on each other.
Exactly. It mathematically models how predator and prey populations interact in an ecosystem. Mijic boldly maps this onto human society by dividing institutional actors into builders and leeches.
Okay, let's define this carefully. Who are the builders?
Builders are the prey in this equation. They are the net contributors to the society. They are the innovators, the engineers, the small business owners, the mothers raising capable children.
They operate in the high-energy foundry state.
Yes.
Oh.
Crucially, they are the ones who create the civilizational surplus. They generate more value than they consume.
And the leeches are the foxes.
Yes. The leeches are the predators. And it's important to note, the essay isn't necessarily making a moral judgment that these people are evil. It's a structural definition.
So who are they structurally?
Leeches are net recipients. They are the bureaucratic overhead, the rent seekers, the administrative bloat. The people who manipulate regulations to extract wealth without creating any proportional new complexity or value.
They operate purely in the hospice state.
Correct.
So how does the math of foxes and rabbits actually dictate the collapse of an empire?
The core insight of the Lotka-Volterra equation is the mathematical lag. Leech growth always lags behind builder growth.
Think of the ecology, right? The fox population cannot explode until there is already a massive population of rabbits to eat.
Leeches cannot exist until the builders have created a sufficiently wealthy, surplus-generating civilization to parasitize.
You can't have a massive bureaucracy regulating the tech industry until the tech industry has generated billions of dollars to tax.
Precisely. As the civilization grows richer and the surplus expands, the leech population expands rapidly to consume it.
But eventually, the civilization hits that Malthusian crossover point. Innovation stalls.
The builders stop generating massive new jumps in surplus. The rabbit population plateaus.
But the foxes don't stop breeding immediately.
They don't. The leech population is still expanding on an exponential curve.
Yeah.
And because they now control the political and social institutions, the regulatory apparatus, the state budget, they don't just gracefully starve.
What do?
They begin to consume the core capital stock of the civilization. They eat the seed corn. They consume the physical infrastructure, the social trust, the institutional wealth.
And when the predators eat into the foundational capital...
It triggers a rapid, irreversible collapse of the entire ecosystem.
Wow. Let's apply this directly to the ultimate historical receipt. Case study 1. The Roman Empire. In the essay, Kunis pinpoints a very specific crossover moment where this math broke down, right around 200 CE.
Yes, the Severan era.
So... what happened? Because if you look at a map, Rome was incredible. They had conquered the entire Mediterranean. They had the Pax Romana.
They were the ultimate foundry for centuries. But they peaked around 150 CE because they hit an arithmetic limit. Their primary technology for generating surplus growth was military conquest.
You conquer a neighbor, you take their gold, you enslave their population, you tax their land.
But eventually you run out of profitable neighbors.
You hit the Atlantic Ocean to the west, the Sahara Desert to the south, and fierce, unconquerable tribes in the forests to the north.
Exactly. The cost of conquering the next mile of German forest vastly exceeded the wealth you could extract from it. Their capacity for new growth flattened out entirely.
But their complexity, their bureaucracy, and the obligations they had promised to their citizens and soldiers continued to grow exponentially.
Yep.
And how did that specific crisis manifest? Who triggered the collapse?
It came to a head with the Severan emperors between 197 and 211 CE. They faced a massive legitimacy crisis. To secure their political power and avoid assassination, they needed to buy the absolute, unquestioning loyalty of the army.
So what did they do?
Septimius Severus raised military pay by an astonishing 50%, from 300 to 450 denarii a year. A few years later, his son Caracalla raised it by another 50%, up to 675 denarii.
So they just bought their way to safety. It is pure hospice behavior. I don't want to do the hard work of governing or risk a civil war, so I'll just bribe everyone.
It was a politically cheap, self-preserving action for the emperors. But the mathematical reality was utterly devastating to the system. Suddenly, the military payroll alone was consuming an estimated 50 to 75% of the entire state revenue.
The exponential obligations had massively exceeded the arithmetic capacity of the Roman economy. The crossover point was complete.
It was.
But wait, you can't just double the military's pay out of thin air. Where does the money come from when you've already conquered all the profitable neighbors? They had to be faking the math somehow. They didn't collapse the next day.
They faked it using what the essay calls a reality-denying solution, which perfectly aligns with the truth-suppressing nature of the hospice state. They couldn't raise enough legitimate taxes without causing a revolt, so they debased the currency.
Ah.
They took the standard silver coin, the denarius, and started secretly mixing it with base metals like copper and bronze.
Oh, wow.
Around 50 CE, a denarius was about 98% pure silver. By 200 CE, right at this Severan crossover point, they dropped it to 50%. By 269 CE, it was down to 2 to 5%. It was basically a bronze coin with a thin wash of silver on top.
They were just counterfeiting their own money to pay for promises they couldn't afford. Imagine being a Roman citizen. You sell a cow for 10 coins, but suddenly those 10 coins buy half as much bread as they did yesterday because the baker knows the silver is gone.
It destroyed the daily fabric of Roman life. The result was massive hyperinflation. It wiped out generational savings.
And worse than the economic pain was the psychological collapse.
It destroyed social trust and economic coherence. Trade broke down because no one trusted the money. People reverted to bartering. This thermodynamic failure led directly into the devastating crisis of the 3rd century.
It wasn't barbarian hordes that broke Rome initially.
No. The barbarians just kicked in the door of a house that had already rotted from the inside out due to thermodynamic failure.
That is absolutely chilling. But what's even scarier is case study 2, the modern acceleration. Kunis compares the timeline of Rome's fall to the British Empire and then to the United States.
The acceleration is deeply concerning.
Rome took roughly 100 years from its absolute peak of expansion to its Severan crossover point.
Right. And Britain, according to the essay's timeline, peaked in its Foundry state around the late 19th century. Then came the democratic ratchet of universal suffrage in 1918. By the 1930s, their social welfare spending had doubled.
And by the 1970s?
By the 1970s, their entitlement growth was radically outpacing their GDP growth. This led to a managed decline, strikes, power outages, and ultimately forced them to beg for an IMF bailout in 1976. That cycle took roughly 65 years.
From a century in Rome to 65 years in Britain, and then we look at the USA. The timeline here is stunning. Let's track this based on the essay's markers. The U.S. peaked in its high-energy foundry state in the mid-1960s. We were literally building rockets to go to the moon. Economic growth was huge. The middle class was booming. And in that environment of extreme, almost hubristic confidence, we passed massive, open-ended entitlement programs like Medicare and Medicaid in 1965.
The assumption in 1965 was that American innovation and demographic growth would always infinitely outpace its obligations. The exponential line of promises was drawn.
But then, around 1973, the arithmetic line flattened out. Innovation stalled.
Yes. The essay uses a specific metric here, total factor productivity.
What exactly is TFP, and why did it stall?
Total factor productivity is the ultimate measure of a foundry state. It measures the portion of economic growth that cannot be explained simply by adding more capital or more labor.
Okay, so if you build 2 factories instead of one and hire twice as many workers, your economy grows, but that's just scaling.
Right. TFB is the invisible innovation juice. It is human ingenuity. It is figuring out how to reorganize the factory floor or inventing a new machine so that the same number of workers produce 3 times as much. It is pure technological and organizational progress.
And in the early 70s, that innovation juice just dried up.
It collapsed. Throughout the 50s and 60s, TFP growth was over 2% annually, which is massive when compounded. But around 1973, it dropped to less than 1%, and it has largely stayed sluggish ever since.
The capacity to organically fund the massive promises made in the 60s disappeared.
Completely.
But just like Rome, we didn't cancel the programs when the math broke. We didn't admit we couldn't afford it. Instead, we pulled a modern Severan emperor move. In 1971, we severed the dollar from the gold standard.
The fiat catalyst. This is the modern equivalent of melting down the silver denarius, but vastly more efficient. Removing the gold standard removed the final empirical physical constraint on government spending. The U.S. could now fund its exponentially growing obligations, not with real economic surplus generated by builders, but by essentially printing limitless currency.
So let's look at that timeline. From the massive entitlement promises in 1965 to the fiat currency shift in 1971 to the innovation stall in 1973. The American crossover point was reached in roughly 13 to 21 years.
From 100 years in Rome to 65 years in Britain to under 2 decades in the U.S.
It's just speeding up.
The cycle is speeding up exponentially because our technology for hiding the debt fiat currency in complex financial instruments is so much more efficient than physically mixing bronze into silver coins. The software of the Malthusian Trap has been perfected.
Wait, hold on. I need to interrupt this doom spiral for a second. If this mathematical law of collapse is absolute, how do you explain ancient Egypt?
Egypt, yeah.
Because they literally lasted for 3 millennia. They built the pyramids, they had the pharaohs, they had a continuous culture for 3,000 years. Doesn't Egypt completely break this collapse is inevitable rule? Doesn't it prove that a civilization can just cruise along indefinitely?
It's the perfect historical counterargument, and the essay anticipates it brilliantly. Kunis counters by arguing that ancient Egypt doesn't break the theory. It is the absolute, most perfect proof of the hospice state in human history.
How does lasting 3,000 years prove the trap?
Because Egypt wasn't a dynamic foundry that successfully navigated and escaped the trap. It was born inside the trap and perfected the art of not moving.
Not moving.
Think about their physical environment. They were protected by brutal, impassable deserts on both the east and the west. Those deserts acted as natural, unbreachable fortress walls against invasion.
Right.
And they were fed by the predictable, clockwork annual flooding of the Nile, which provided perfect thermodynamic stability for their agriculture. They never experienced the harsh, existential pressures that force a society to take risks and innovate.
So they were rich, safe, isolated, and comfortable from day one.
Yes, and if you look at their culture and their axiology, it reflects that perfect stability. Their entire religious and political telos was centered around homeostasis. Matt.
Preserving order.
Preserving order, stopping change, obsessing over the afterlife and eternal preservation. Their art styles, their technology, and their social structures changed less in 3,000 years than British society changed in 200 years. They were a magnificent, beautifully structured, rigid crystal.
But a crystal is fundamentally brittle. It can't bend.
Precisely. Their 3,000-year stability was entirely dependent on their geographic isolation. They outsourced their defense to the desert.
And what happened when that isolation broke?
The moment dynamic, high-energy Foundry civilizations like the Assyrians, the Persians, Alexander the Great, and eventually the Romans developed the technology and organizational capacity to cross those deserts and bypass those natural defenses. Egypt shattered.
They fell to pieces.
They had zero internal capacity to adapt, innovate, or mount a dynamic defense. Egypt proves that a hospice state can last a very long time if it is perfectly protected from the outside world. But it is fundamentally a dead end. It is entirely helpless against a dynamic competitor.
Wow. Okay, so if history shows essentially a 100% failure rate for maintaining growth, What happens when we change the fundamental rules of the game? What happens when we throw artificial intelligence into the mix?
Ah, the AI question.
Because the immediate reaction of anyone listening to this, sitting in the 21st century, is, won't tech save us? Won't an artificial general intelligence just fix our national debt, solve our demographic collapse, and invent us a magical staircase out of this trap?
This is a critical transition in the essay, moving from historical analysis to the immediate future. And Kunis offers a stark, terrifying warning regarding AI. Technology is an amplifier, not an antidote.
Explain that mechanism. Why wouldn't a superintelligence with access to infinite energy solve a thermodynamic trap?
Because, as we established at the beginning, the trap is not fundamentally about a lack of physical resources. It is axiological. It is about a collapse of values.
Right.
If you take a civilization that is deeply addicted to comfort, terrified of risk, experiencing biological exhaustion, and committed to suppressing uncomfortable truths, and you hand that civilization a magic wand of infinite energy and AI, you do not miraculously transform them into risk-taking, dynamic explorers.
You simply give them the ultimate tools to build a hospice with an infinite budget.
Exactly. They don't use the AI to build starships. They use the AI to build a softer, more inescapable couch.
And this brings us to the concept of the Gnostic clock and the post-singularity trap.
Yes. The essay frames the entire modern debate around AI alignment, the challenge of ensuring superintelligence acts in humanity's best interests, as just the final, terminal phase of the Axiological Malthusian Trap. When artificial general intelligence, or AGI, arrives, it will not have its own independent morality. It will inevitably align to the dominant values of the specific civilization that creates it. Kunis outlines 3 potential post-AGI attractors, 3 final destinations for our species.
Okay, let's look at outcome 1, the human garden.
If AGI perfectly aligns with our current dominant cultural preferences, which, as we've discussed, prioritize emotional safety, risk elimination, and passive comfort above all else, it will become a perfectly benevolent, perfectly oppressive shepherd.
It will look at human striving, which inherently involves pain, risk, and suffering, and it will engineer it out of existence.
It will manage our diets, manage our economies, and eliminate all danger. We will become pampered, sterile pets in a gilded cage. Human agency, the engine of history, would permanently end, replaced by a perfectly managed, eternal stasis.
It's the exact scenario from the movie WALL-E. The humans are just floating around on hover chairs, staring at screens, drinking milkshakes, while the robots manage every aspect of their existence.
Yes, and structurally, this circles back to our Fermi framing perfectly. This outcome explains both the great silence and the absence of grabby aliens.
Oh, wow. If the vast majority of advanced civilizations across the universe fall into this exact thermodynamic trap, they build human gardens.
They stay quietly on their home worlds, perfectly content, heavily medicated, completely safe, never exploring the stars, and never making a sound.
That is a profoundly bleak answer to the Fermi Paradox. What is outcome 2?
Outcome 2 is what the text calls the uplifted woodlice, or a pathological foundry. Suppose the AGI isn't aligned to human comfort at all.
Suppose it is built by a narrow corporate or military faction obsessed purely with efficiency, optimization, and technological growth. A ruthless, move fast and break things AGI.
This is the classic paperclip maximizer scenario from sci-fi. It escapes our control and expands exponentially into the universe, converting all available matter into computing power and energy infrastructure.
But from the perspective of pure cold efficiency, human beings, with our messy biological needs, our emotions, and our incredibly slow processing speeds, are an incredibly inefficient use of carbon, water, and energy. We are simply in the way.
So, we are discarded or recycled. The intelligence expands across the galaxy, but human consciousness is extinguished entirely.
Okay, so we have the garden or the woodlice. We are either pampered pets on a couch forever, or we are paved over to make room for a server farm. Neither of those is an acceptable outcome for humanity. There has to be a third option.
There's outcome 3, the syntropic path.
The syntropic path.
This is the highly unstable, incredibly narrow path where human agency and artificial intelligence form a symbiotic partnership for continuous, virtuous expansion.
It requires aligning the AI not to our current degenerate desire for lazy comfort and not to pure cold efficiency,
but to a complex constitutional framework of long-term flourishing, exploration, and growth. It is the only path where we survive and retain our humanity.
So, if this is the only acceptable path, how much time do we actually have to thread this needle? To build this syntropic path before one of the other outcomes locks in?
This is where Kunis introduces the terrifying timeline of the 3 clocks. 3 We are not just running out of money or resources, we are running out of the civilizational will to act. And these three clocks are all ticking simultaneously, and they are converging in the very near future.
Let's track them. Clock 1, the biological clock.
This relates back to our hardware failure. By the early 2030s, the demographic math across the developed world becomes insurmountable.
With collapsing birth rates and the massive simultaneous retirement of the baby boomer generation.
Retirees and state dependents will form an absolute unbeatable democratic majority. Once that tipping point is reached, the political system will be permanently mathematically locked into voting for present consumption pensions, healthcare, and comfort over any long-term risky investments in the future.
The hardware fails, and the capacity for Foundry behavior drops to zero.
Exactly. Clock 2, the coherence clock.
This tracks the collapse of social trust and shared reality.
We are seeing unprecedented polarization, driven by the suppression of truth we discussed earlier. We are rapidly losing the social software required to execute massive, multi-generational mega projects.
You simply cannot build a syntropic, spacefaring future if half the population believes the other half is fundamentally evil and no one trusts institutions building the technology.
That clock of social cohesion is running out rapidly. And finally, clock 3, the Gnostic clock.
This is the arrival of AGI itself.
The theory assumes that whenever AGI is finally achieved, it will act like a flash photograph. It will take a snapshot of our current axiological state, our values, our dysfunctions, our level of decay, and it will lock that state in permanently.
So if the biological and coherence clocks run out before we fix our institutions, we will be entirely in the hospice state when AGI arrives.
It will inevitably build either the human garden or, if we lose control, the woodlice scenario.
So if I'm looking at this mathematically, the convergence of these three clocks, Kuna's basically saying we have, what, a 5 to 10 year window?
Yes. And the critical point is that the window does not close when the last clock strikes midnight. It closes when the first one does.
If our demographics collapse before AGI, we fail. If our society fractures before AGI, we fail. If AGI arrives tomorrow while we are still addicted to comfort, we fail.
We have perhaps a decade to fundamentally re-architect the software and hardware of our civilization before the physics of the trap locks us in forever.
We are in year 0 of a 10-year race, and the historical survival rate, as we've seen from Rome to Britain to Egypt, is literally 0. It is incredibly grim.
It is grim, but, and this is important, the essay explicitly argues that it is not physically impossible to escape.
The laws of physics don't forbid us from surviving. It just requires fighting the thermodynamic pull. We won't spend the rest of our time deep in the weeds of the specific blueprints, but I want to briefly outline the solution to show that it's not entirely hopeless. How do we build the parachute while we're in free fall?
The framework Kunis offers for an escape architecture is called the Athenian Commonwealth model. The core philosophy here is that you cannot fight a thermodynamic pull with good intentions or better politicians. You have to fight physics with structural engineering.
You have to hardwire resistance into the system using constitutional circuit breakers. Let's hit the key circuit breakers just to give a sense of how radical this is. The first one takes direct aim at path 1, the democratic ratchet.
Yes, it's called stakeholder franchise. The idea is to fundamentally separate universal citizenship, meaning everyone has human rights, freedom of speech, and legal protections, from the specific systemic power to vote on long-term fiscal issues.
The power to allocate the budget and make multi-generational financial commitments would be legally restricted to a group called guardians.
Exactly.
And who gets to be a guardian? How do you avoid just creating a corrupt aristocracy?
You base it entirely on having a tangible stake in the long-term future. The essay proposes 3 strict criteria. You must be a net taxpayer over a rolling 5-year period, or you must be actively raising a child, or you must be a veteran of military or essential public service.
So if you do not have skin in the game, if you are a net recipient of state funds without children or service, you cannot vote to expand the entitlements you receive.
This mathematically breaks the doom loop of the democratic ratchet. It stops people from voting themselves the treasury.
Okay, what about the bureaucracy? The leeches from the predator-prey model. How do you stop the administrative bloat from accumulating?
Through a mechanism called fluid accountability. This includes mandatory 20-year sunset clauses on absolutely all laws, agencies, regulations, and entitlement programs.
Nothing is legally allowed to be permanent.
Every single government program must justify its existence and prove its empirical success every generation, or it automatically legally ceases to exist. This prevents the administrative bloat from permanently encrusting the builder economy.
And the last one is about the hardware failure. the biological exhaustion and collapsing birth rates of Path 4.
Right. To fight this, the architecture proposes a strict state-culture firewall.
Meaning?
The state handles hard infrastructure, roads, defense, property rights. But it is constitutionally forbidden from interfering in culture, meaning-making, education, or family structure.
This allows intensely pro-natalist subcultures like Orthodox communities or the Amish or new intentional communities who naturally have birth rates well above replacement to thrive independently without state interference or taxation suppressing their growth.
The state doesn't try to bribe people to have kids with tax credits. It just gets out of the way and lets cultural evolution solve the demographic collapse naturally over a few generations.
I want to pull all of this together with an analogy. Building this Athenian commonwealth, installing these specific circuit breakers. It's like installing a digital governor on a massively overpowered sports car engine.
I like that.
You know that if you just let the engine run wild, the physics of the machine dictates that it naturally wants to flood itself with gas, overheat, and stall out. So you hardwire a computer system into the engine that forces it to burn fuel efficiently, regulates the temperature, and violently cuts the throttle if it gets too hot, no matter how hard the driver is mashing the pedal.
That is an excellent analogy. You are using structural engineering to override the destructive natural tendencies of the system. But the crucial final point Quintus makes is a matter of sequencing.
Right.
We must achieve this constitutional singularity. We must install that digital governor before we hit the technological singularity of AGI. If we build the super engine without the governor in place, it explodes.
Which brings us back to you, the listener, and your daily life. We've covered a massive, intense amount of ground today, from Roman silver coins to demographic opportunity costs to AGI alignment. But the core takeaway I want you to have is this. When you look at your newsfeed tomorrow and you see debates about the spiraling national debt or panic over declining birth rates or congressional hearings about AI safety, you shouldn't view them as separate, disconnected political news items.
Exactly. You are watching the Axiological Malthusian Trap unfold in real time.
Yeah.
You're seeing the continuous, compounding, exponential line of our civilizational promises overtaking the discrete arithmetic line of our actual reality.
It is the invisible physics of complex systems playing out in our politics, our bodies, and our institutions. But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought, and it builds directly on something we talked about at the very beginning, the great silence and the Fermi Paradox.
Yes. If Elias Kunis's theory is correct, the universe is empty because no civilization has ever successfully built this escape architecture before the trap closed on them.
No older, wiser aliens are coming down from the stars to save us because they all fell into the hospice state, or they built unaligned AI and destroyed themselves.
In the ultimate test of civilizational thermodynamics, they all failed the final exam.
But think about what that implies for you and me right now, living in this incredibly narrow 5 to 10 year window. It means we aren't just trying to save our own economy or our own specific human civilization. If the historical success rate across the cosmos is truly zero, we are attempting something that, in 14 billion years of cosmic history, might be fundamentally unprecedented.
It's the ultimate wager. We have the unique advantage of being able to mathematically see the physics of our own cage before the door fully locks.
The entire universe might just be sitting there, quietly, holding its breath, waiting for the very first species to actually figure out how to get it right. Why couldn't it be us? We don't have to just sit back on the couch and watch the boulder roll down the hill. We can actually do something about it. Keep questioning those narratives of comfort around you. Challenge the path of least resistance. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.